The first time she said it, it didn't sound dramatic. It sounded defeated. Like someone who had finally run out of strength to pretend she still had any left. Rain fell in thin sheets, the kind that made the streetlights blur into soft halos. The city was loud in the distance, but here, on this quiet roadside near the hospital entrance, everything felt strangely still. She stood there, trembling, her arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to keep her heart from falling apart. And then she whispered the words that would change both of our lives forever. "I can't walk, leave me." I stared at her, unsure if I'd heard right. Because you don't tell someone to leave you unless you truly believe you're a burden. Unless you've been carrying pain alone for so long that you start thinking love is something you don't deserve anymore. Her knees buckled slightly, and she tried to smile like it didn't matter. Like she was already used to being left behind. But something inside me broke at the sight. I stepped closer, my voice low, steady. "Then I'll carry you." Her eyes snapped up, wide with disbelief. "You don't have to." "I know." The rain soaked through my jacket, but I didn't care. I crouched in front of her. She shook her head quickly, panic rising. "No, please. Just go. You don't want this." "You don't get to decide what I want," I said gently. "And I want you safe." For a moment, she looked like she might argue again, but then her shoulders sagged, and something raw slipped through her expression. Exhaustion. Fear. Loneliness. The kind of loneliness that doesn't come from being alone, but from believing no one will ever stay. I lifted her carefully, and she gasped softly, her hands gripping my shirt like she was afraid she might fall even from my arms. She was lighter than she should have been. And that alone told me this wasn't just about her legs. This was about everything she'd been carrying inside. Her name was Elara. I learned it between shallow breaths and awkward silence as I carried her toward my car. She didn't want help. Not because she didn't need it. But because life had taught her that help always came with a price. I placed her gently in the passenger seat, adjusting her coat around her shoulders. She stared straight ahead, her jaw tight. "You don't even know me," she murmured. "I know enough," I replied, starting the engine. "What do you know?" I glanced at her, my voice softer. "I know you're hurting. I know you tried to walk anyway. And I know you asked me to leave because you didn't want to be a problem." Her throat bobbed. "That's what I am," she whispered. "A problem." "No," I said firmly. "You're a person." The silence after that felt heavy. Not empty. Just full of things she didn't know how to say. On the drive, she finally spoke again, barely audible. "I used to run." I looked over. "What?" "I used to run every morning," she said, her voice shaking like the memory itself hurt. "I loved it. The wind, the freedom. I felt like nothing could catch me." Her fingers curled in her lap. "Then one day, everything caught me. I didn't push. I didn't ask for details she wasn't ready to give. But I could hear it. The grief in her voice. The mourning of a life she'd lost. When we reached my apartment, she stiffened. "This is a mistake." "It's shelter," I corrected. "Just for tonight. You can decide everything else tomorrow." Her eyes flickered with something like fear. "You don't understand. People don't do this for no reason." I knelt beside her door, meeting her gaze. "Maybe I'm doing it because I know what it feels like to be left." That made her freeze. Because it was true. Years ago, I'd watched my mother waste away in a hospital room while my father disappeared into excuses and silence. I'd learned early what abandonment looked like. And I'd promised myself I would never become someone who walked away when someone needed me most. Inside, I helped her onto the couch, placing a blanket over her shoulders. She sat stiffly, like she didn't belong anywhere that felt warm. I made tea, the simple kind my mother used to make when the world felt too heavy. When I returned, Elara was staring at her own legs, her eyes glossy. "I hate them," she whispered. My chest tightened. "Don't. They betrayed me." "No," I said, sitting across from her. "They're still yours. They're still trying." A tear slipped down her cheek, and she wiped it angrily. "I don't want your pity." "It's not pity," I said. "It's respect. For surviving something I can't even imagine." That broke something in her. Her shoulders began to shake, and suddenly she was crying, not politely, not quietly, but like someone who had been holding back an ocean for too long. "I'm so tired," she sobbed. "I'm so tired of being strong." I didn't rush her. I didn't tell her to stop. I just sat there, letting her pain have space. Because sometimes love begins like that. Not with romance. Not with fireworks. But with presence. With staying. The next morning, she tried to leave. Of course she did. People like Elara always try to run before they can be abandoned. She struggled to stand, her face pale with effort. I stepped forward immediately. "I can manage," she snapped, though her voice wavered. "You don't have to manage alone," I replied. Her eyes flashed. "You don't know what alone feels like." I paused, then said quietly, "I do." She hesitated. Then, almost like it escaped her, she whispered, "Why are you doing this?" The question wasn't really about me. It was about hope. About whether she was allowed to believe in kindness again. I took a slow breath. Because once, I needed someone to carry me too. Not physically, but in every other way. And no one did. Her expression softened, just slightly. "So you're trying to fix the past?" "No," I said. "I'm trying to choose the future." That day, I drove her back to the hospital for her appointment. She didn't speak much, but when the doctor came in, I saw the way Elara's hands trembled. The diagnosis wasn't new. A spinal condition, worsening over time. The kind that stole mobility like a thief in the night. The doctor spoke gently about therapy, about aids, about adjustments. Elara stared at the wall, her face blank. I knew that look. It was the look of someone trying not to fall apart in front of strangers. When we left, she didn't speak until we reached the parking lot. Then she stopped suddenly, gripping the side of the car. "I can't do this," she whispered. I turned. "What?" "This life," she said, her voice cracking. "Needing help. Being watched. Being broken." "You're not broken," I said firmly. She laughed bitterly. "Aren't I? Look at me." Her knees trembled, and she sank down onto the curb. "I can't walk," she whispered again, like a curse. "Leave me." The words hit harder this time. Because now I understood. She wasn't asking me to leave because she wanted to be alone. She was asking because she was terrified I wouldn't. Terrified that if I stayed, she might start to believe she mattered. And believing is dangerous when you've been disappointed before. I stepped closer. Then I crouched, sliding my arms under her. Her breath caught. "What are you doing?" I lifted her, holding her firmly against my chest. "Then I'll carry you," I said, my voice steady even as my heart thundered. Her hands clutched my shoulders. "You can't carry me forever." "Maybe not," I admitted. "But I can carry you today." She stared at me, tears spilling freely now. "Why won't you let me disappear?" Because the truth was. I saw her. Not her condition. Not her weakness. Her. And I knew what it was like to feel invisible in your worst moments. I carried her to the car, ignoring the stairs, ignoring the weight, ignoring everything except the way her trembling slowly eased. Inside the car, she whispered, I don't want to be a burden. I turned to her, my voice soft. You're not a burden. You're a human being in pain. And you deserve love even here. She looked at me like she didn't know how to accept that. Like kindness was a language she'd forgotten. Weeks passed. Therapy appointments. Hard days. Small victories. Some mornings she could stand longer. Some nights she cried quietly, thinking I couldn't hear. But I did. And every time, I stayed. One evening, she sat beside me on the balcony, the sunset painting the sky in gold. I used to think love was for people who were whole, she said softly. I glanced at her. And now? Now, her voice trembled. Now I think love is for people who choose to stay. I smiled faintly. That's what it is. She turned her face toward me, tears shining. Thank you for carrying me. I reached for her hand, squeezing gently. You're carrying me too, I admitted. Her brows furrowed. How? By reminding me that strength isn't walking alone, I said. It's letting someone walk with you, even if they have to carry you sometimes. She exhaled shakily, leaning her head against my shoulder. And in that moment, I realized something powerful. Carrying someone isn't just about lifting their weight. It's about lifting their worth back into their own hands. Elara would not always need my arms. But she would always need to know she wasn't meant to face life alone. And neither was I. Because the strongest love isn't the kind that shows up when things are easy. It's the kind that kneels beside you in the rain. And says, if you can't walk, then I'll carry you. Until you remember how to stand again. The morning after that night felt surreal. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets washed clean and glimmering under the timid sunlight. Elara sat by the window, her legs stretched out awkwardly, the blanket still draped over her shoulders. I brought her a cup of coffee, silently sliding it across the small table between us. She didn't look at me, her gaze fixed on the city beyond, but I could feel the tension in her shoulders. I hate needing help, she said finally, her voice low, almost a whisper. I know, I replied, sitting opposite her. But needing help doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. She turned her head slightly, eyes glinting with unshed tears. You don't get it. People stay at first, and then they leave. They think it's temporary, but eventually, the patience runs out. That's the truth. I took a slow breath. Maybe some people leave. But some of us stay because we see something worth staying for. She studied me, suspicious yet curious. And why would you stay for me? Because you're not just a problem to fix, I said. You're someone worth knowing. Someone worth carrying, literally and figuratively. And I've learned that the right kind of love isn't measured by convenience. It's measured by choice. For a long moment, she didn't speak. Then, hesitantly, she asked, do you really mean that? I nodded. I mean it with every part of me. That day, I helped her into the car again. Physical therapy had started, and though progress was slow, she was trying. Her steps were shaky, her face pale with effort, but she kept going. I walked beside her, steadying her when she wobbled, cheering her quietly with every small victory. You don't have to make a big deal out of it, she muttered during one particularly hard session, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. I am making a big deal, I replied, smiling. Because every step you take is a battle you've already won once by not giving up completely. She blinked, caught off guard by my words. You really say things like that to everyone? Not everyone, I said. Just the people who need to hear them. Days turned into weeks. I watched her relearn how to navigate life on her own terms. There were setbacks, days when her frustration boiled over, when she slammed doors, when she refused to eat or rest, but through it all, I stayed. I held her when she cried, laughed with her when she found small joys, and never let her feel alone again. One evening, we sat on the balcony together, the sky painted with streaks of orange and pink. She leaned her head against my shoulder, letting the silence stretch comfortably between us. "I don't remember the last time I felt safe," she whispered. "You're safe now," I said gently. "I know," she said, her voice trembling. "But I've spent so long being afraid, I don't know if I can trust it." I held her hand. Trust is learned. Step by step. Sometimes, it's not about forgetting the past, it's about choosing to move forward despite it. Her eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of hope, fragile but undeniable. "You've carried me, more than physically," she said softly. "You've carried me when I thought I couldn't go on, when I thought no one would ever stay." I squeezed her hand. "And I'll keep carrying you, as long as you need. Not because I have to, but because I choose to." Tears slid down her cheeks, and she laughed softly, the sound mingling with the evening breeze. I think I might actually be able to stand on my own someday." "You already are," I said. "You just didn't realize it yet." She leaned back, breathing deeply, letting the wind brush against her face. "Thank you," she whispered. "For not leaving." "You never asked me to," I replied. "You just needed someone willing to stay. And I always will be." In that moment, I realized the truth about love: it's not always about grand gestures or sweeping declarations. Sometimes, it's about being the steady presence in the storms, the arms that lift when the legs can't, and the voice that says, "You are not alone." And as we watched the sunset together, the world didn't feel as heavy anymore. Because she had learned to lean, and I had learned that carrying someone doesn't diminish you, it strengthens you. By the time the stars blinked awake above us, Elara was laughing quietly, her hand resting on mine. The road ahead would still be hard, but we had already taken the first step, learning that together, even the heaviest burdens could be carried. And in that quiet, unassuming truth, we found hope. If you want, I can now combine chapters 1 and 2 into a fully polished, 1,500+ word story optimized for YouTube narration, keeping it engaging from start to finish with maximum emotional impact. Do you want me to do that next? The following weeks became a rhythm neither of us expected, a dance between fragility and courage. Elara was learning to navigate the world on wheels, her walker at first, then her cane, but the real challenge was learning to trust herself again. Every step was a reminder of what she'd lost, and yet, somehow, a testament to what she could reclaim. One morning, I found her sitting on the balcony before sunrise, wrapped in a thick blanket, staring at the horizon. The city was quiet, a soft gold light spilling across the rooftops. I poured her a cup of tea and joined her silently, letting her absorb the peace before words intruded. "Do you ever get used to it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Get used to what?" "Feeling broken," she admitted. "Feeling like the world expects me to disappear just because I can't do it all myself." I reached over and took her hand. "You don't have to get used to it. You have to learn that it's okay to be incomplete, to need help, and to still be whole." She gave a small, skeptical laugh. "Whole? That's rich, coming from someone who carries me everywhere." "Exactly," I said, smiling. "Because carrying someone isn't weakness. It's strength. And it's proof that love isn't about perfection, it's about choice." She looked at me, really looked at me, as if trying to understand why I hadn't walked away when everyone else had. Her eyes softened, glimmering with something fragile, hope. Then came a day that tested both of us. Her legs had been weaker after a recent therapy session, and she struggled to stand in her apartment. Panic flashed across her face. "I can't do it," she whispered, her voice tight with fear. "I can't walk, I'm useless." I knelt before her, lifting her gently into my arms once more. "Then I'll carry you," I said, the same words from that night when we first met, but this time, they carried more weight, more promise, more trust. She hesitated, then let herself be held, and I realized that the miracle wasn't in the act of carrying her. It was in the way she finally allowed herself to be seen, to be vulnerable, to lean on someone without shame. We moved slowly, step by step, through the apartment, her breathing slowing as the fear melted into the warmth of being understood. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, subtly, she began standing longer, walking shorter distances without support, laughing at herself when she stumbled, marveling at every small victory. I was always beside her, sometimes carrying, sometimes steadying, but always present. One evening, as the sunset painted the sky in deep amber, she turned to me with an intensity one hadn't seen before. "Do you know what this feels like?" she asked. "Being wanted in the world again?" I shook my head gently. "Not entirely. But I know the courage it takes to accept it." She exhaled shakily, leaning her head against my shoulder. "I don't think I realized that someone could care this much, without conditions." "I do," I said quietly. "And I hope you never forget it." Weeks later, she could walk without me holding her. Not far, not yet, but far enough. And I realized that the true journey wasn't just about her learning to stand. It was about both of us learning that love, real love, is not about fixing what's broken. It's about staying when everything feels impossible. It's about carrying each other until we can carry ourselves again. The world was still daunting. There would be hard days, pain, setbacks, and moments when the past's shadow tried to creep in. But as I watched Elara moving confidently across the room, a soft smile on her face, I knew something extraordinary had happened. She had reclaimed her strength, not in isolation, but because she let someone share the weight of her journey. That night, she whispered the words I had hoped to hear since the very first day. "Thank you, for carrying me, for staying, for choosing me." I took her hand, our fingers intertwining. "I didn't carry you because I had to," I said. "I carried you because I wanted to. And I always will." She smiled softly, leaning into me, and for the first time, I saw her not as someone broken, but as someone whole, resilient, alive, and unafraid to lean on love again. The rain returned that night, tapping gently against the windows, but this time, it felt different. It was no longer a storm we feared. It was the sound of life washing over us, reminding us that even when we falter, even when the world seems heavy, someone willing to carry us can make all the difference. And together, we learned that sometimes, being carried isn't a weakness, it's the first step towards standing tall again.